I have spent quite a bit of time looking at all of the ways in which culture, American culture, has been top down, and things that seem spontaneous and bottom up are in fact the plans being executed of an organized minority. Well, in this video, I've got pretty much the smoking gun that proves everything I've been saying for years with receipts. I was kind of mind blown when this came across my desk because a buddy of mine said, hey, you've got to take a look at this book. All that stuff you were saying about BLM being astroturfed and actually being the foot soldiers of the regime, Greta Thunberg's all the way down. Remember all those catchphrases? If you're pushing at an open door, you are not a radical. Well, this book right here, America's Peacemakers by Bertram, Levine, and Grande Lum, I think I'm saying those names correctly, has all the receipts. It basically says there was a department, a secret government department, that just in case anything went wrong, made absolutely sure that the narrative was set and that events went the way that the planners wanted it to. Honestly, this is, like I said, it's mind-blowing that what this book reveals. So I'm going to get into some of the things that they've been involved with soon. But first, I think it's worth setting a bit of context. Who was it that was involved in this specifically? Well, in the years before LBJ, that is Lyndon B. Johnson, signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, they needed to manufacture consent. Now, if you remember, there was the Brown versus Board of Education case back in the 1950s, and this was used to build the momentum for the eventual signing of the Civil Rights Act by Johnson. However, these were not organic or spontaneous events. They were carefully planned. And I'm going to go through some of the people who actually did it. The department I'm talking about was created under Title 10 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There's Johnson with Martin Luther King Jr. behind him, and is known as CRS, a peacemaker. And that is what this book is about. America's Peacemakers basically spills the beans on what the CRS has been up to for the past, since 1964. But it was actually created, or the plans to create this department predate the Civil Rights Act. And Lyndon B. Johnson, when he was the senator there in the 50s, was absolutely instrumental in bringing this about. And here are some of his co-conspirators. There's a man called Benjamin V. Cohen, who is known as the architect of the New Deal. He was also quite a major Zionist back in the day as well. So he's a pretty influential fellow, big in the FDR administration. So Cohen worked with Johnson to bring this about. Another man really instrumental was Arthur Goldberg, who sat on the US Supreme Court. He was part of the group that brought about the CRS. And finally, Arnold Aronson and Joseph Raw, who were working with the NAACP. They were really part of the organized minority who brought the Civil Rights Act about, working with people like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, all of that stuff were really part of this group. And if you're interested, I found this article by Clay Risen in Tablet magazine, written 11 years ago, essentially framing all of the stuff they did in a positive light. Okay. What I am really interested in here is not so much saying, well, civil rights good, civil rights bad. If you ask me, LBJ, one of the worst presidents. If you ask me, what we call woke today and the whole culture around that is directly downstream of the Civil Rights Act. Culture is downstream from law. But what interests me actually here is the mechanism, the how can I say, the lack of leaving things to chance, the lack of genuine spontaneity that this department, this CRS, has helped facilitate over the years and the decades, and it's still up and running today. The CRS. This screenshot I took is of a live stream on YouTube of people talking about exactly what it is they do at the CRS and basically boasting about their activities. It was really quite remarkable. So let's get into what it is that the CRS did, what it is that the CRS does. It's been described as a spontaneous protest machine. Like I said, it was created by Title 10 of the Civil Rights Act, originally drafted in the 50s by LBJ and this cast of characters that I just talked you through. And it was created strictly in a non-law enforcement capacity, a non-law enforcement agency is the words they use, tasked with keeping the peace, quote unquote. It was tasked with mediation and conciliation.
At FanDuel, we know hockey fans don't just have a hunch. You have a hockey hunch.
In all matters related specifically to racial relations in America. It was given no power to investigate, assign fault, or press charges. That's left up to the law enforcement agencies, FBI, and so on. Yet, the amount of power they still have, despite that, is pretty far-reaching under Title 10. In its public-facing media, CRS presents itself in this manner as a kind of non-law enforcement agency. And its agents are called conciliators. All of this information, by the way, is from this book by Levine and Lum, which, it's not that difficult to get hold of. You can just get it on Amazon. It was published 5 years ago. And so let's get into some of the things that this department can do. The first thing to bear in mind is that it has a confidentiality claim on par with the FBI. That is why I'm calling it a secret agency in the title of this video, because virtually nothing its conciliators do is a public record. If you make a freedom of information request, you can only reveal basic information like travel receipts. Aside from all the official records kept for the DOJ and its internal reporting, all notes made by the conciliators are destroyed, and conciliators may invoke their confidentiality privilege before Congress and before the courts, and they have done so many times in the past. So if Congress wanted to haul up the CRS, they could say, look, actually, we've got a right not to tell you what we've been up to. So they're protected, under Title 10 of the Civil Rights Act. So they don't actually have to reveal information about what they've done. So that's a really important thing to understand, because there's a certain degree, there's a lack of transparency there as to what these guys have been up to. They are kind of spooks. They're kind of they're like a nudge unit, basically. In this country, in Britain, whenever something goes wrong, there are these people who kind of creep up and start whispering in the ears of victims and so on. This is a nudge unit, disaster response unit, whatever they call it. Well, in America, this CRS, as long as it is pertaining to something to do with civil rights, that is race, and now gender, sexuality, anything to do with the Alphabet Spaghetti Committee, basically, and the CRS will be on the scene. Okay, now this actually works both ways, and it gets pretty dark. So let's carry on here. Another thing to understand about them is that, again, by law, by Title 10 of the Civil Rights Act, they are self-consciously a pro-civil rights organization. They don't pretend to be impartial. They are for this. They are set up to enforce civil rights morality. So when people like Curtis Yarvin talk about the civil rights regime and about the rewriting of the American Constitution by the Civil Rights Act, it's stuff like this, really, that he may well be talking about. The CRS only acts in the interest of advancing the civil rights movement. So that's black representation, transgender youth visibility, construction of mosques. For example, in one case, they helped to construct a mosque in the middle of an all-Christian town. They started initially as a strictly racial organization, but under Obama, there was a anti-crime legislation. And it's funny, I've been writing a speech recently in a conference I'm going to. So I was actually, when this guy sent me this book, I was already looking into what changed, because my paper's about how woke is downstream of law. And I was saying, well, in this country, it's pretty obvious. The Equality Act 2010 basically set in stone what became woke, and culture then caught up with the law. I was like, in America, they've had civil rights on the books for a long time. So what happened? Well, in 2009, Obama had something called the anti-hate crime bill. It's got it's the name of two senators, but it's known as the anti-hate crime bill. And that was established in 2009. So really, if you think, well, from that moment on, woke goes into overdrive. And that's because that bill expanded the remit of civil rights into all of these other areas. It's basically the American equivalent of the Equality Act 2010. In this country, we also had anti-discrimination laws on the books, but the Equality Act not only unified them all, but expanded them all. And this bit of Obama legislation in 2009 did the same thing. And notably, Mitch McConnell and friends didn't block it, right? Mitch McConnell was known for blocking everything Obama tried to do. Didn't block that one, notably.
Nuts.com is a snacking utopia. We have supplier relationships from all over the world.
So the CRS's scope covers religion in theory, on paper, but in practice, it only intervenes on behalf of religious groups with a visible racial minority. For example, the Arab American community. I did a bit of snooping on what like the CRS have been up to recently, and there's a ton of stuff about like Arab American visibility, building mosques and things like that, which is really, really quite remarkable to think that a federal government agency is doing all of this sort of thing. So in this book, Bertram Levine, who's one of the authors, admitted what the true purpose of it was. Basically, they wanted to prevent what they call, and this is a direct quote, white backlash to the Civil Rights Act. Okay, and this is talked about in the introduction of this book by Levine and Lum. Immediately after its creation, the CRS began working with groups like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to harass so-called, again, this is a direct quote, lily white towns, organizing and executing large-scale demonstrations by coordinating with local law enforcement. And again, this is something I've looked at in the past. I always found it really strange that in all these all-white towns in Georgia, people like Oprah Winfrey were sending people down there to harass the locals, and you know they were basically bussing in protesters in these quote unquote racist towns. And I always thought that was a really odd thing, and this explains the mechanism behind it. It was the CRS who were doing that. Without all of this, the aggressive project of forced integration in both the South and the North would have been impossible. For example, CRS agents were directly involved in the forced integration of Catholic communities in Boston in the 1970s. Whenever a white student was violently assaulted, for example, there was a 17-year-old called Michael Faith in the mid-70s who was assaulted, the CRS agents would be on the scene immediately, not to provide physical aid to the injured student, but to prevent the white students from fighting back.